Top Bed Talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. This session is our Perioperative Quality Initiative session when everybody's sat down. But I'm going to ask each of the POQI board members who has spoken to give us a little bit of an explanation, because I think there are some things that we consider, we assume that may not be obvious. So first one was, Andy, you touched on the funding model.
Yeah, sure. So we are a charity. In America, which is where POQI is incorporated, the tax status of the corporation matters. And so we are what's called a 501c3, so a not-for-profit organization. So we raise money from anyone who'll give it to us, basically, which is usually device and pharma companies with an interest in the perioperative space. It's actually extraordinarily tightly controlled, and we're extremely careful. And in fact, to be fair, and there are members of the industry in the room, to be very fair, they are actually much more concerned about conflict and appearance of conflict than we are, in fact. Would you say that's fair, TJ? Yeah. So the way it works is the money is spent on the costs of the meeting, which is basically travel and accommodation, and then dissemination costs. So there's a reason why all of this content is open access, because we pay the open access fees. There's a reason why the information is available. And so our model has changed from being companies with a specific interest in the space to a specific interest in supporting perioperative education. So some of our meetings have been sponsored by companies that have absolutely no product in the space at all, and no one ever talks about that. So we're very grateful to them. We don't have any booths, we don't have any exhibits, we don't have any sponsored talks or anything like that. We do allow companies, we ask companies to send folks to the meeting, because sometimes there's a lot of valuable input. And for those of you that aren't aware, there are a lot of very, very smart scientists working in industry, and it's good to have their involvement. Nevertheless, we do maintain a sort of a firewall, especially in the plenaries and the breakout groups. So these guys come to listen, but are not involved in the content. And neither are we afraid to make a statement which is apparently conflicting with the company's interests, if that helps answer the question.
That's perfect. And I'm not sure we explained how we do this. So Tim, if you just, what does a POQI 2-day look like? However long it takes. What's the process?
So we'll invite people who we, as a group, think of as experts in the area. We try and get a diverse mix of people from different parts of the world, mix of surgeons and anesthesiologists. The chair of each group is very important, because chair is the person who is ultimately responsible for managing the group and delivering the manuscript. We obviously want someone who has enough time to be able to do that. Then we, as a board, will encourage the chair to decide what questions they want to look at, to do the literature review beforehand. Obviously, they typically will involve all the group in the literature review and set up Word documents, etc. And then during the 2 days, the first day, each group will present to the plenary, and the plenary is the entire group of, say, 30 people, and that their job is to critique the work that the group has done, suggest what they should, questions should they be looking at, what they come out with statements. You want to critique those statements, disagree, have constructive disagreements, generally, should we say. And then the groups will go back to their individual breakout rooms, and they'll work on their statements and their infographics, and then they come back and present to the main group. So we go back and forth from small group to plenary over the course of the 2 days until the final session. That's when we do the voting. You have to agree on all the statements will be presented. Hopefully, we try and get consensus, and we try and, as much as possible, work to get consensus. But if there's not consensus, we'll document that. We'll have a dissenting opinion in the manuscript, and we document what the votes are and the grade of the evidence as we see it, and that's published in the final manuscript.
It's a remarkably effective way of generating consensus, because at the end you either sign up to each statement or you put your name to the dissent and say, actually, I don't agree with that, and typically that might lead to an editorial. We've got a bit smarter about doing this over time, so the sort of transition from more hit and miss review to more systematic review, and the use of grade and that type of thing, the sharpening of methodology. TJ?
Right. So over the years, clearly, the way that evidence are graded and also changed a little bit. But the process I think Tim described as the modified Delphi technique. But the grading is really how do we systematically grade those statement and evidence. And I think we have used the grade system, which is, again, well published and well known to already most of the people, in the scientific literature. And that has been really our guiding sort of, using that system in the last few POQIs. I think in particular POQI 6 and 7, I think we used that, or POQI 6 we used that.
Monty, these are not nice guidelines, are they? Sort of the difference between guidance and guidelines.
Yeah, very, very important point. And we actually started the journey by trying to resist grade for that reason. But we got drawn into it. In other words, they previously told you're going to find it very hard to get this published if you don't sort of say, there is no evidence what we think you should do, which is where you quite often end up. Now, with NICE guidance, let's take NICE guidance 174, which is the UK in-hospital fluid guidelines, taking a completely purist approach to evaluation of the evidence. After 2.5 years, they could conclude definitively that we do not know. That is, if you read the 10 recommendations, that's essentially what it says.
And we managed it in the weekend.
We managed it in the weekend. Because the rules of engagement are, unless there is what we call definitive evidence, you cannot go beyond, in that guidance, the fact that we do not know. And a lot of people then turn around and say, well, that's really not very helpful. So like John was presenting, which is more akin to a POQI conclusion, if you can't find definitive evidence on a balance of probabilities, a pragmatic approach to this is to use a balanced and buffered electrolyte solution with the following caveats. So at least you can walk away with something that is not a standard or a rule or a law, but we hope is measured enough to say, that's helpful, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, I'll ask the 3 other panel members to introduce themselves one by one.
So, Denny, Levett, Perioperative Medicine from Southampton.
My name is Cheryl Crisafi. I'm a coordinator nurse for a cardiac surgery program in the U.S., and I'm a member of the ERAS Cardiac Society Executive Board.
Desiree, Chappell. That's heard me several times.
So we're obviously involved in POQI. We've been protagonists. You've all experienced the POQI process. What's it like? Strengths and weaknesses? Any particular reflections on the POQIs you've been involved with?
Yeah, before I was actually involved, I've been in 2 of the consensus weekends. And before I was involved in those, I had so much respect for the process because for me, it helped me in my job, do my job a lot better because I could take these guidelines to my group and say, this is not me saying this is what we should do. This is the group of experts that have distilled down, current literature and giving us a pathway to take care of our patients. And so once I got involved and really started to understand the process, had a lot more respect, even more respect for it, and was really excited to participate. And then again, be able to take all of that back to our groups and say, look, it's not black or white. Nothing that we do is black and white, but these are some great recommendations and ways that we can do better in quality for our patients.
Thank you.
So POQI, their mission aligns nicely with the ERAS Cardiac Society's mission, which is to disseminate evidence-based practice for care of patients. And I find this a very valuable tool. I'm asked a lot how we can start an ERAS program. And you need to have your team see the vision. And POQI has lots of resources. Our team personally used the HANS assessment tool that was right in that presentation today as our baseline assessment. And I find a lot of people are looking for easy, accessible tools, and POQI offers those. And I direct a lot of people to POQI's website.
Well, I think I agree with 2 of the things we said. I think the most useful thing about it is that it doesn't stop. The recommendations don't stop at the point that the evidence ends. And most of us know that pretty much every area of our practice, we need more evidence. And that's an unsatisfactory bit about systematic reviews. So I really like that element of POQI. Having been involved in the process, it's quite hard work. And, and it's a very interesting process going through 2.5 days of getting some people who start with very different, strongly held beliefs to compromise. But I think that's some of the strength of what comes out. And also, I think when we go back into the main group and have what you think was a clear statement challenged by everybody, I think that's a really good editorial process. So by the end of the 3 days, getting 30 people who quite often have quite strongly held beliefs to agree is a real achievement. It's quite tiring.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move away from the process and focus on the questions from the audience. most of which are about hypotension, although there's a great one which is actually a suggestion. Would you do a POQI on implementation best practices? So we need to put that on the to-do list. Most popular question at the moment, how much is hypertension just reflective of underlying patient fragility rather than being a direct driver of mortality?
I was just going to say.
Yes.
Quite a lot. We've only got one interventional study still, is that correct? Unless I've missed one. We've got a UTA study, which is, it made it into JAMA, but it was only 294 patients, roughly. And that was one interventional study showing an improvement in outcomes, but otherwise we haven't. And we have jumped all over hypotension. And I know the two paper that Monty mentioned, I recommend that you download. It's from the EBPOM group. It's just been published, and it clearly shows over the last 10 years the amount of fluid that has been given has dramatically decreased. The amount of vasopressors that have been used have dramatically increased. Don't know if any of you know EBPOM. We're part of EBPOM, and we get, it's actually very good.
We being Duke.
Sorry, we being Duke. Duke. Not Duke. We get now an email every month with a score comparing us to our peers, which is, I think, useful. And we had a lot of education beforehand that we're not trying to say you're good, you're bad. It's just, for the measures that you choose, like for the amount of, and hypotension is one of these. I have one for PONB, so I have the number of patients I have with PONB, and it gets my score. And only I get my score, and then I get the average of my peers, and I can compare it to them. I get the amount of AKI, which is fantastic. How many of you know your individual AKI rates? But we also get blood pressure. And we have blood pressure is the cumulative time for mean less than 65 for each of our patients. And obviously there's variability between the practices that you do. And if you do more high-risk patients, it may be more. And we need to do that education before we roll it out. But the aim of it is naturally, you see your score, and all the residents see their score, and nurse needs to see their score. And by having this score, you're going to try and avoid it. So we have seen, and this may be partly what we've done, a big increase in vasopressor use to try and avoid this hypotension. And some of that is probably before your patients are still hypovolemic. So we need to go back and look at our AKI rates and see how it's changed over time. And we're in the process of doing that. And this larger EBPOM study is really the first one that has shown that, we've tried to do good fluid management, we've tried to avoid hypotension, but now we're starting to see that AKI has actually gone up. So there's definitely
risk of unintended consequences.
Definite risk of unintended consequences. Yeah.
Okay. Do the panel have any comments or thoughts on the use of fluids or blood pressure medication to manage hypotension to facilitate the moving component of dreaming? I think we're talking about telepresence.
They might be. Denny, you're using some oral antihypotensive form.
Yeah, there are, in geriatric practice, it's common, and I'm going to have a mental problem about the name of the oral version that we use, Mythen, yeah. And we don't use it routinely, but I lead a clinical surgical HDU, so level 2, level 1 plus, after major elective surgery. And there are occasional patients that once you've excluded other causes, and you want to be able to mobilise, and the main problem is postural hypotension, and you've made sure that they're not bradycardic, as we were learning about earlier, and you're happy that they're not underfilled, we have found it to be effective. Because there does seem to be a group of patients that, despite correcting the basics, they just can't stand up because the blood pressure drops, and you either end up being on noradrenaline for 4 or 5 days, or you stop it and give them something else.
And Denny, do you hold on the ACE and the ARBs if they happen to be on them, or other hypertensives until they've at least been mobilised?
Yes.
Because sometimes you look at the chart and you say, hang on a second, they've just had all 3 of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have to say, we hold on those until they're mobilising. Yeah.
Great. Are there any guidelines about reintroduction of antihypertensives post-operatively? So when and at what blood pressure and in what order?
In that blood pressure POQI, there are some recommendations based on current best evidence, which again is lacking in many, but there is evidence of harm if you withhold beta blockade for long periods, so as soon as the patient is able to tolerate. So this is where it comes in terms of, so we wouldn't stop probably when they're on a beta pressor, and the same with the ACE inhibitor. Again, there is evidence of withholding for long periods has a worse effect on outcomes. So yes, but we wouldn't restart an ACE inhibitor if someone's got a developing AKI, for example.
And US practice, Cheryl, Desiree?
We restart the ACE and ARBs as long as their kidney function and we don't see any risk of acute kidney injury, meaning we use urinary biomarkers. And if those are elevated, we give them some time before we restart those. And we use the midodrine as well in certain cases and have found that successful. We do try to wean it off before the patient's discharged, if at all possible. We don't really like to discharge patients on that. Yes, we restart their antihypertensives if it's appropriate.
Which urinary biomarkers are you using?
We use Nephrocheck, which is TIM2 and IG7, I think it is. But Nephrocheck.
Yeah. So I've just one more thing. So we always restart them in that order. So a beta blocker, then ACE, and then all the other ones that I think are less important because those are the ones. They're not less important in the longer term, but there's no data about them in the short term.
Everybody else seems to be nodding, so I'm not going to pursue that any further.
Yeah, we do the same. I think it's the classic statement that we did put it in the paper. We restart them when they're able to tolerate. That's a classic statement that says something but says absolutely nothing. Because everyone would start them when they can tolerate them and not give them when they can't tolerate them. But unfortunately, that's where we are.
Yeah.
In the Great Fluid debate, there was some commentary about the leg raise not being as helpful as previously thought.
So again, it was talked about in the post-operative phase of the blood pressure manuscript. I was in that group, so that's what I remember. And if you look at it, the positive predictive value is reasonable. So if you do it and their blood pressure does improve, it suggests it's got quite good positive predictive value that they may be hypovolemic. If, on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not hypovolemic. So some people will say they just didn't do it. Some of my European colleagues were very keen on it, and so it went in for exactly that. And we state in the paper, it's you can consider doing a straight leg raise if it's positive. It has a reasonable predictive value. So,
let's put you on the spot and hands up from the panel if you use it in practice.
Let's be honest, it's something that's talked about much more in expert panels than actually done.
Yeah,
would you agree?
Never.
Hands up, you use it in practice.
You mean routinely or occasionally?
Routinely?
As required.
This was the post-op group. That's where it was mentioned on post-op ward hypotension, whilst trying to figure out the cause of hypotension, which comes back to this whole business about what do we do. I mean, hypotension is a sign; it's not a diagnosis. So, we shouldn't treat a sign, we should treat a diagnosis. So the whole of the post-op group was about what's the cause. So one of the things you could do while trying to figure out the cause was stick their legs in the air, and if blood pressure goes up, that was probably a good indication that they might be dry, amongst other things.
Or they need more pain relief.
Yeah.
We're going to get vehement agreement from the audience.
As I say, I don't really use it, but that's what the group consensus was.
So I think one of the things that has changed between then and now is the availability of bedside ultrasound. And you can find out the answer to all of these questions if you know how to do this. And then people say, well, we don't have ultrasound in our POQI. And I'm like, well, so you don't do regional anesthesia then? Oh, well, that's different. Okay, well, how is it different? Well, it's for delineating anatomy and seeing things. But people, for some reason, are very reluctant to pick up a bedside ultrasound probe and start thinking about the heart and the lungs. Much more happy to wail away in the neck with a very sharp needle rather than... And I just don't quite understand why. And so I do think if you image the cava and it's either compressible or distensible, depending on whether the patient's ventilated or not, there's a ton of information there. And I think that's what I do now. So I don't do passive leg raising anymore.
I think this is also changing. I think, for example, in my center, we buy our residents a pocket ultrasound, every one of them. And that certainly wasn't the case. So I think we are shifting to, almost using it as a stethoscope.
Oh, there's no question about it. I could 100% agree. There you go, any residents out there who want to go to America, Stony Brook.
Go.
Pick up a free pocket ultrasound.
Dr. Gann here will be happy to write the check.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions. Any recommendations about so-called hypotensive anesthesia requested, for example, for neuro or ENT surgery? Who wants to comment on that?
Well, I think in all the guidelines that's referred to on the basis of the fact if one can find a true surgical necessity that relates to patient safety to reduce the blood pressure, which either for a long period of time or temporarily to achieve something you can mutually agree, is necessary, then absolutely that is the right thing to do. But the idea that one should leave somebody hypotensive having a knee replacement, for example, for a prolonged period of time, because you have this belief that they bleed less when other surgeons, they don't bleed less, if you see what I mean, is a serious conversation you have to have between the people involved. And it's, you know, if you're worried about it as an anesthesia provider and your surgeon insists on it, you might have to have a discussion about not working together.
And the sort of data that Tim was alluding to, the MPOG data, is going to be very informative for those discussions.
Absolutely.
We're at closing minutes, so any last hands from the audience, please.
Go ahead.
Just a comment, I guess, from our last year's experience in our ARC unit. Vasopressors are grossly overused in theatre. We play catch-up all the time in the recovery room. We don't tolerate hypotension with bridge with vasopressors and work it out. I've just spent God knows how much money on training all my staff in ultrasound with a formal diploma because I think it's invaluable for the reasons that have been discussed. Whatever it is, it seems to be working, but just being inactive is just not acceptable.
I just test something on a guy, I believe for a very long time, I think I've seen it in practice, I think I've practiced it, that intraoperative hypotension is almost completely avoidable with meticulous attention to detail, with the appropriate use of extra fluids but not too much fluid, and the judicious use of vasoactive agents as indicated. And let's bang in the large syringe of whatever it is, and let's treat what we've caused with a phenylephrine infusion is none of those things, if you see what I mean, and leaving people relatively hypotensive. You said, Guy, that you'd eliminated acute kidney injury.
I lied, Monty. We had one. And the circumstances were I was watching West Side Story and got a phone call just in the middle of one of the songs because the night resident couldn't turn up. So we ended up covering it with a sort of PRN from the anaesthetic registrars in theatre, which means they never turned up. And so by the morning, that patient had not been rounded on regularly, had been clearly hypovolemic and developed acute kidney injury, which resolved. So once we broke our protocol, we got a problem. So we did a one-off withdrawal trial and haven't done that again. So, but otherwise we've had absolutely none, which is surprising but pleasant.
So I've got two final straightforward quick questions. We're running over slightly, but we had a bit of slippage earlier on. Oral ephedrine, seen in some ICUs. Any experience, any comments? I don't know if that was an audience or online comment. If anybody wanted to comment on that directly. Okay, and then the final one was interop.
We should respond to that. Worth looking at. So.
Worth looking at.
Yeah.
I've never used it.
No, exactly. We shouldn't dismiss the question if people have had experience.
Is it bioavailable?
Going back a little bit to the noradrenaline question, going back in the UK, I do think the consensus from the conference was that physiologically it makes more sense to use agents with some beta rather than pure alpha.
I think we've gone norepinephrine. I'm not sure what happened since Brexit, but I think we're...
Oh, you haven't?
I think so.
I haven't.
Haven't we?
Southampton.
Okay, sorry, I take that back. Okay.
Anyway. And people are starting to use it more. I know in France they use it all the time. Physiologically it makes more sense. We obviously haven't got any outcome studies comparing the two, but I think it does make physiological sense to use some beta, and whether that's ephedrine, whether that's norepinephrine, whether that's oral ephedrine.
Metronidazole is very popular in bits of UK.
No, it wasn't my question, but I have, when I was a registrar, we did use it for orthopedics for patients who'd had spinals 30 minutes before first mobilising oral ephedrine.
Good experience?
It seemed to work in that unit.
Interesting.
Ephedrine is used fair amount in the States. Intraoperatively, again, when you're trying to correct heart rate and blood pressure. Yeah. And also is actually a good drug if you have nausea and vomiting associated hypotension, especially
but not orally, though. But not orally,
right? She would say.
I mean, for Q&amp, you're going to give the IM so it lasts longer.
IM.
Final question, slightly different perspective, but intraop and post-op IV lidocaine in colorectal surgery. I know it's not directly what we're basing on, but it certainly was covered by some of the guidelines. So any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is used. I think there are quite a few studies, and there's a meta-analysis. I think my reading is that jury is still out. It's not really. I think that some studies show it's great benefit, and 1 milligrams per kilo per hour, and others maybe less so. So it is fairly widely used, I think, in the States.
Yeah.
The question is whether you use that instead of, if you use another way to administer it.
I was at a meeting a few weeks ago with the president of ASRA, the American Society of Regional Anesthesia and Pain Medicine, who you probably know. And he's a very strong advocate for the use of intravenous lidocaine infusions.
So there's been a significant kickback in the UK with the college making some concerned noises because of concern about adverse effects.
Because of the risk.
Concern of a variety of adverse effects, including cardiac and neurological.
I think it's dose dependent, right?
But the fact that if it's not in a highly monitored environment, there's significant risk.
Well, you give anything dangerous and you don't pay attention, bad stuff happens. Yeah.
Good. We've run over slightly. I hope you forgive us. Another great day. Really, really good session. Thank you all for contributing on the panel. Thank you for your questions. Thank you.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.